consumers are ready for uptick in prices so that corporations don't do business in Russia.
They're making more money on the war than they did before, either because other businesses exited or for some other reason. But they actually, I would say it's blood money. I call myself a political activist. I've been presented as a blogger or political observer. So I was a political activist inside the United States. I left Ukraine over 29 years ago. But when the war broke out, I realized I can't stand aside and I must get involved in any way I can. And one of the ideas that I had was to, at the time, it was over a year ago, to make sure that Western businesses exit Russia as much as possible.
And when the war started a year ago, there was a strong push, especially for U.S.-based businesses, to cut ties with Russia.
Because when they stay and operate in Russia, they pay taxes to the Russian government, which allows the Russian government to finance the illegal aggression, the illegal war against Ukraine. And the way to do it, I thought at the time, at least, that the way to do it was two parts. One is identify those companies and write them a letter, basically threatening them advocating or threatening, however you choose to position it, but telling them they should exit the Russian economy. And if they don't, we will stop buying their products.
But the Kremlin is exerting pressure to bring brands and business back.
And the effectiveness of the letter is that this is not abstract. They can't ignore it. Their customer service or whoever is in charge of this, they're getting those letters. They have to read them. They have to at least respond, almost mandated to respond with something. And it gets registered within those companies. Whether it was going to be effective or not was a big question at the time. And the second part, of course, is to become a socially conscious consumer. And in many ways, it doesn't have to be just Ukraine, but in this case, it had to be about Ukraine. Become a conscious consumer and stop purchasing products from those companies. Actually follow up on the threat. So that was the idea about a year ago. When I looked a year later, I realized that the strategy to this point hasn't worked. Obviously, it wasn't. I'm just one person. I advocated for this as much as I could. I'm sure there were others doing the same thing. But a lot of companies still remain in Russia today, and they find all kinds of excuses and all kinds of justifications for doing it, or sometimes they just do it without any explanation. And I decided I want to revisit this subject and see what else we can do and how we should approach this.
So do you recommend consumers to start writing letters that they have learned that still operate in Russia? Do you think if we do it in volume, it would help?
Well, as the saying goes, don't make predictions, especially about the future. But it has a lot to do with how this war ends, right? And most likely, Russia is not going to become a democratic country with human rights, right, anytime soon. I think the opposite. This war is forcing Russia even deeper into authoritarianism, and it's going to be they're going to be separated from the world even more over time. So I don't see companies that exited Russia coming back. I think there's going to be a even further separation between the Russian economy and the rest of the world. Now, those companies that stay, I think eventually they will be forced to leave. It's just that it's going to be too late at that point in terms of, helping stop the war. So I think they are damaging their image. I suspect that the same companies that refuse to leave Russia, meaning they put their financial interests above everything else, they're probably the same companies that have a low ESG score. In other words, they probably have issues in other areas outside of Ukraine having to do with environment, social issues, governance. And unfortunately, that area of our marketplace, I guess, is not well developed. I would like to have each company scored, reliably scored on the ESG score. But unfortunately, I haven't seen anything that covers the whole market or that I can really trust. That is something I would be looking for in the future. And this would help consumers to consistently support and buy products from the companies that have very high ESG score as opposed to a low ESG score.
I am also a consumer of products. It was very funny in European deli that used to be called Russian deli, as you very well know. I witnessed in the beginning of the war a fight where one person was actually screaming at the store manager to remove all the products, all the Russian-made products from the shelves, and yet they're still there. At this point, we, as PissedConsumer, you spoke about your side where you were writing letters to the customer service. We were writing letters to PR departments, to marketing departments of the companies. What we are doing as a website, we are highlighting on our website pages of the companies that still operate in Russia. So as you visit PissedConsumer, you can actually see those companies that we were able to find that we have proof of. They are marked as businesses still operating in Russia. What other creative ways can you think of, if any, to persuade world corporations to stop doing business in Russia?
Well, it has to be public pressure, I think, at this point. If they haven't done it before for reasons like ethical and moral reasons, if they haven't done it previously to at least protect their image and protect their brand, it would have to be more public pressure and financial consequences. That is the only thing that's going to work on those who still haven't left the Russian economy. The problem with boycotts or public pressure that I think I've identified a year later is that it's not easy to organize all the consumers. Even people who care, as you said, you had a poll where most of the people said, yes, they're willing to pay more. It's still difficult to get them from I'm willing to pay more to the actual change in their buying habits. And there are several problems, I think, that we can talk about. One is, so the boycotts, I think, don't work because there's not enough people doing it, not enough discipline, not enough perseverance, right, to actually trying to see it through. So the way I think to approach this is not to try, on an individual level, not to try and boil the ocean. You can't physically. You have your, everybody has their lives. You just physically can't. You don't have enough time in a day to overnight switch. First of all, do all the research and then switch to all the brands that don't work in Russia, don't do business in Russia. It's a lot of work, but you should try and do it every chance. Every time you have a chance to do it. Maybe one brand per day, maybe one category of a product that you can attack a week, whatever you're comfortable with, and it involves some work. It's not always about money. I mean, you said they're willing to pay more. It's not always that you have to pay more. It's that you have to invest time. I mean, there are brands that I've been buying for 20 years. Now I have to revisit this, do the research, make sure they exited the Russian market. A lot of them did not, because they're like probably the most popular brands in the United States, consumer staples, consumer products. And then do some research and find an alternative. Then there will be scenarios where you will easily find a good alternative, actually better. And you will say, why didn't I do this before? Because the product is better, cheaper, and I should have done it a long time ago. But there are other categories of products where you come to the store and virtually everything in that category is manufactured by companies that haven't exited Russia. So that becomes a more challenging proposition. And I can go through some examples of what consumers could actually do and how they could do it. But there are multiple steps. And again, my advice would be don't try to boil the ocean, one step at a time, and together we'll get there.
So you actually bringing up a very interesting point, that the company that has not exited Russia right now will still be forced to leave Russia. It will just be at a little bit later point. So CEO of that company is probably thinking, well, it's going to boil over. We've spent enormous amount of money 30 years ago trying to penetrate Russian market back then. I don't want to go through that again right now. So I'll just stick around and see how it goes. The war will be over and I already have the market. I don't have to worry about it. But what you are saying, you're putting a different side of the medal is, hey, you're staying in Russia now, still staying in Russia. Every day you generate rubles or dollars in taxes to Russia. You are tarnishing your brand image today. And most likely, it will tarnish that brand image for years to come. Like, you know very well, for many, many years, a lot of people would not buy German cars after the war. It took years upon years to start buying German cars for some consumers because of the World War II.
Yep, something like this could happen here. They're a little bit removed from it, like they think they're removed because they're only paying taxes, right? They're not Russian businesses. But in our day and age, when the age of social media, when everything is basically known.
Now let's shift focus to global snack maker Mondelez International, which is facing a significant corporate boycott in the Nordic region due to its ties with Russia. Major companies across Norway and Sweden have decided to stop selling Mondelez's products, including popular brands like Oreo and Toblerone.
I don't think they're going to be able to escape. And again, this is a problem with companies' managements and executive. They're thinking short term. It's called short-termism. They want to meet the revenues next quarter, and then the next quarter, and then the next quarter. They are not thinking strategically, and they're not thinking long term. I think if they did, like some other companies, they would have exited the market. And by the way, some companies, they lost money. There's no question about it. They lost money exiting the market, but they went on principle.
Actually, I saw a news article somewhere that loss was very short for corporations that exited last year. The loss was very minimal in terms of stock prices, and then it recovered.
Well, obviously, multinationals like Procter & Gamble, Russia cannot be more than a small percentage of, I don't know the exact numbers either, but they can't be more than a small percentage of their total revenue. But the managers responsible for it, they have to meet their goals or whatever their financial goals are, right? It trickles down to individual directors and managers responsible for regions and countries. And they've made a decision, hey, we can still make money here. We made the investment here. We don't want to lose. We don't want to leave. And they might be, you're right, they might be thinking that this is going to blow over, that they're going to come back and everything is going to be fine, like nothing happened. And we can't make them, right? We have to continue the pressure because, unfortunately, it's been, like I said, it's been over a year. And they're still there, and they're still operating, and they're still not suffering enough consequences.
Now let's talk about Procter & Gamble, who produces this particular brand, Tide. Last year, they announced that they stop investing in their business in Russia. As far as I know, they had 2 factories on the territory of Russia, and now they they operate in their nominal capacity. Also, last year, Procter & Gamble announced that they stopped delivering several brands to Russia, and they only left deliveries, the shipments of the basic hygiene products. And as we can see, the detergent is one of them. So they only left several brands that they ship to Russia and not more.
And what we're talking about here is ultimately only if they realize that they're losing more money around the world than they're making in Russia, only then the financial pressure is going to mount to force them to exit. So the real question is, how do we make it happen? How do we make it so that they understand they're going to lose and they are losing more than they're making in Russia?
Some CEOs of Procter & Gamble say, hey, our shaving blades are not attributing to the war. We are just helping normal Russians to shave. And we are not supporting Putin's regime. How would you tell them that they are wrong? How would you tell those CEOs that it is proper and conscious decision? How would you explain it to them?
Well, I'm looking right now at the article by Novaya Gazeta in Europe, and they're actually listing the worst 15 companies whose profits actually increased in Russia after the war started. And the ones that, I mean, there's a lot of like petroleum and, some international banks I'm not familiar with, and tobacco companies. But there's Pepsi, there's Mondelez, there's Mars, Kia, there's Procter & Gamble, right? So they're actually making more money. There is an argument to be made that they're making more money on the war than they did before, either because other businesses exited or for some other reason. But they actually, it's, I would say it's blood money. The CEOs, so what could be, I'm trying to predict their counter argument. They would say, look, we're selling, it's not people's fault. We're selling basic stuff that, like you said, shaving, Gillette shavers or, liquid detergent, basic stuff that people need. Why do you want to punish regular people for something their government is doing? And there's a big philosophical debate how much, every person is responsible for what's going on. I don't want to get into this, but ultimately it comes down to, without getting into this part, it comes down to you are paying taxes. The Russian government can then take the money, turn around, buy more weapons, manufacture more weapons, generally support their economy so that they don't feel the consequences of the war as much, while they are bombing Ukrainian citizens and destroying their country, destroying their cities, and committing war crimes. That would be the argument. But like I said, unfortunately, if that argument didn't work on them for more than a year, I think they're only interested in money, maybe publicity, brand, they're interested in their brand image, which will ultimately lead to loss of money. So that's the only thing that I think is going to work on them at this point.
We've had Dmitry Abramson at the show today. We are very much interested to hear your opinions. So please use a little bit of your time to write us your comments under the video. How do you feel about boycotting brands that still operate in Russia? Thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention. Dmitry, thank you for being on the show today. I really appreciate it.
Michael, thank you for the invite. It's a very important topic. I'm very happy that your company and you personally are so much involved in this, and I think you can really make a difference.